kind of brings me tears to my eyes. I do have a memory the night before we were leaving, sitting in the rocking chair with my granddad, and my mom said, just say goodbye to your grandparents and your uncles and aunts, because we don't know if we'll ever see them again. So, because, my mom and I left by ourselves, and my dad stayed behind too. It took him more years to come, but it's a sad memory. And then the fear of separation anxiety, it's kind of like I've always had that since that time. When you're like 3 and you get attached, and my mom was she wasn't really being mean or nothing. She was just saying, say goodbye, because we don't know if we'll ever. And then I heard him talking, we don't know if we'll ever see you again, so say a good goodbye. And I was eating some cereal with my granddad. He had this rocking chair in the living room, and there was a balcony, and I remember him, being really, I was very close to him, and he was trying to make me laugh and stuff, but it was I remember that it was kind of sad, very, very sad for me. And, then we found out that my grandparents would be coming, soon. And because they came a little later, they had to live in Spain for a year. And so they went from Cuba to Spain to the United States. And we went from Cuba to Mexico to the United States. We had to fly into Mexico because my mother had to get a Mexican visa to be able to get out of Cuba. And my grandfather had a good friend in Mexico, and he took us in. And when we did get to Mexico, when we got to the embassy, the guy there told my mother that they didn't have my legal papers to get out. And so he told her that I had to put me back on the plane, and I had to travel to Cuba by myself. And my mother said, no, I spoke to the consular, el consulado, and she waited through the night, and they said he won't be here till the morning. And she says, look it by the number, look it by the name. And they wouldn't. They really gave her a hard time, because they thought it was the people there thought that Cuba was something good was happening to Cuba, and we shouldn't have left. And so they didn't cooperate much, but she did wait for the consul the next day, and he was very friendly, and he looked at it through the names, because he had misspelled something about the name. But we had to spend the night outside in a bench, all night raining. It was cold in Mexico. When they let us out of Cuba, they let me one dress, because my mother had a little coat they made for me, but they told me I can only take one item, only one dress, and my mother only one outfit. That's all she had. So we froze to death, and I got pneumonia after that. And then I got a heart murmur, because all through the night in the rain until the counselor got there. And then finally he said, yes, these are her papers. And he pulled them up, and he had them somewhere else in another drawer or something. And then finally we were able to, she didn't have to send me there, but we had to wait 6 months in Mexico. And then we were able to fly to Worcester, Massachusetts. So I was getting a taste of the cold, because it can get cold in Mexico City. So, but yeah, and my mother, she was 25, but she was very mature, and she was a strong woman. She didn't give up. She said, no, I'm not sending my daughter alone back to Cuba. And she said, I'm not going to Cuba. You have to kill me for me to go back there after everything we've waited for our time to get out. It was to get out when it was our time. So in the meantime, my grandparents were in Spain, and then we were so happy when we were all reunited in Worcester, Massachusetts, where my uncle, reunited with my grandmother, my grandfather, my youngest aunt, and my uncle and his wife were there. And then a few years later, my other aunt came, and then my dad came about 5 years later. So then God gave him a church for himself. We were looking for a building, and my mother lived in Hurley Manor across from JU, and said, there's an Episcopal church. It's called St. Luke's Episcopal Church. Now, mind you, St. Luke's was a doctor and a priest. That's what a coincidence. And so she says, that church is empty. The people are dying out. So the senior warden, by the name of Janice, when she met my husband, she fell in love with him. So his whole congregation, about 250, when he went into the St. Luke's building in Arlington and on University Boulevard, all came with us. And he would have I believe, a 10 o'clock English service, and then a 12:30 Hispanic service for years, like for the first 8 years. But then the pandemic came, And when the pandemic came, we had to go virtual. And when we went virtual, we did it bilingual. And he had once a month of bilingual in which I would translate for him. And everything, the music would be English and bilingual, like Elia Vivoni's church now is bilingual. And virtual for about a year, and then he opened up. We opened up with safety precautions. No one's got COVID. Everything's been fine. You know, we do communion individual little everything's been great. But now we go back, but we have bilingual services. One service at 10:15, bilingual. And the music is, you know, English, Spanish, and the people that love it, they like it, and they're fine. So now we have one service bilingual. And we used to have lunch afterwards all together. Lunch was in the middle of the two services before, but my husband cooks for his congregation. Most of the time, he loves to make lunch for them, and he does. And most Sundays, he does make them lunch, and they love it. And, you know, it's been fine.